Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Experience Kills. I'm your host Ben and with me today is Richard.
Hello fans.
A little bit presumptuous but I like it.
Have we got fans?
I think we might have a couple. We've got some subscribers. Let's go with that.
Yeah. Hello subscribers.
And if you're not already a subscriber, it's time to hit that like and subscribe button. You know it.
And one day if you want to be a fan, you can. Nothing's stopping you.
No, absolutely. PayPal me some money, then you're all good. Talking about money, do you know what's got a lot of money involved with it?
Banks?
Yeah, but also racing, which is what we're here to talk about today, Richard.
God, that's true. Yeah, I didn't think of that, but yeah, there's lots of money in racing.
There is, and that was my really poor attempt at a segue. So please don't stand all over it. I appreciate it.
Okay.
But we're not here to talk about Formula One, which we were here to talk about a few months ago, which I know you enjoyed greatly.
Oh, thank goodness. Go on.
Today we are here to talk about another game by Codemasters, though. This is the return of the Grid series of games with Grid, no subtitles. They're just relaunching it after about 5 years away. And the Grid sort of series of games, there was about 3 or 4 of them, and they were an evolution of the TOCA race driving series, which came about in the original PlayStation in around 97. And now, many, many years later, after, like I said, 5 years away, Grid has returned to Codemasters in their attempt to create a more accessible, I don't want to say arcadey necessarily, but it has that kind of presentation racing game where it's across multiple disciplines, from hot hatches to some open wheel in there as well, but like minis and coupes and sport GT cars, basically the cars you'd see in a Gran Turismo game, a Forza game, or something like that. So a more wide variety of cars. Now that would appeal to you more, I'm going to assume, Richard, because I know you like your Forza games.
I love my Forza games. Yeah, so this was always more of a serious, not Grid especially. I don't think I've played any of them actually, but certainly going back to Colin McRae and the TOCA games, all those Codemasters old driving series, they were always a bit more serious, weren't they?
Yeah.
So if this is edging into Forza territory, how does it hold up?
Well, so Forza obviously has 2 brands. It has the Motorsport and the Horizon brand. And this is more in the Motorsport area, obviously, because this is on tracks and it's not open world. And thank you for mentioning the Colin McRae and the Dirt Rally series, because that, I guess, in a way, is the other Codemasters racing series that has been doing very well. And Dirt Rally 2.0, I think it's just Dirt 2.0, came out last year and has actually, really well received. A really, really good rally game. The thing with Grid we have here is that I think my problem was I might have expected a bit too much from this game, perhaps because of how well the F1 series has developed on this current generation of hardware. But if you actually go back to the start of F1 on this generation, it was quite bare bones. And that's kind of what we have with Grid. The big feature in Grid is that there is this nemesis system where the AI driver will kind of remember and usually resent your behavior on track based on, say, if you're super aggressive, you ram him or whatever, and then throughout the race he will sort of challenge you, chase you down, go after you specifically, and that the racing cars in this particular form of motor racing aren't just sticking to the most optimum racing line. They actually have some differential behaviors, and that works to a degree, though for the most part, like I said, it usually comes forward through just their aggression, but it adds a little bit of variety to the racing, which is fine. I had no problem with the racing, the handling and stuff. The cars felt okay. It felt more along the lines of a Need for Speed than it did necessarily a Gran Turismo or Forza Motorsport. I actually found the racing quite easy, and it starts you on like a default medium setting, so maybe that's just tuned more like an easy setting, I'm not sure, because I found myself having to bump the difficulty up into hard very quickly because I was just constantly in the lead. Even if you started at the back of the pack, you can just jumble through, especially on the tracks that are provided, being a lot of like city races, so they're very closed in, so you can just basically bump a car, bounce off the walls if you want, with very little punishment to your performance, and you can just get up to the front of the pack without really trying. Some of the tracks are like open, more like proper circuits that you'd expect in, say, the Formula One season, so you can go off the track and lose position from that. But, there's an easy rewind feature, again, in the game, and you can customize all of this. You can limit the rewinds, you can make the driving much more realistic, you can make the AI smarter and everything. but it felt like this game kind of doesn't want you to do that. It's got a bit of an identity problem. It definitely feels like it's trying to be arcadey, trying to be cool and accessible, and it has a presentation that really speaks to more to Need for Speed and Horizon than it does to Gran Turismo and Motorsport, if you know what I'm saying. It's a bit weird, Richard.
It's the old design by committee problem, I guess, isn't it, where they've tried to, I guess, gauge their market, see what people want, and then made something that maybe doesn't naturally fit because they have that serious bent, and that's been a kind of staple of their previous series.
Yeah.
And where they fit well, really, that's their niche.
Yeah, for me, Codemasters have become the kind of leaders for the simulation racing genres of late, especially with F1 and the rally games, where this is clearly aiming at that more accessible market, but it kind of is trying to almost push aside the pedigree and the quality of the sim stuff for this accessibility, and therefore it becomes this real jumble. Now, what I was kind of hoping from Grid was a bit of a narrative, a bit of a story, a bit of a connective tissue that has been attempted previously by Codemasters with some of their other Grid entries. I think not the previous one, but the one from 2 iterations ago, which focused on like building a story and a character and actually having these like named rivalries with real, voiced antagonists and protagonists and things like that. But there's none of that in this game. It is presented, the races are presented in a very, very, I would say, boring list almost, where each series is broken down into its own category, and then you just pick a race from within the series, which you have to do a certain level of performance in, say third or above, or in the top half of the pack, and then you unlock the next race, and then the next race, and then the next race. And that's the only real motivation you have for progressing through the championships.
That's very, very peculiar, isn't it? It feels like this is more than a reboot in just name. Obviously, it's got just the title of Grid, so it feels like it's a return back to the roots and a fresh start. But functionally as well, then it is still stripped back. It's a strange time to do that. I mean, we're the stage that we're at in the console life cycle. You'd expect this sort of thing to happen at the beginning of a new cycle. Rather than the end of an old one.
Yep.
It's a very peculiar move for them to do.
I can't. I can only speculate as to the motivations about re-releasing and this franchise and bringing out a new iteration at this point. Maybe they had a team that pitched it and said, we can do this for relatively low budget, relatively low time and manpower, and we can put out a game at a good enough standard. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's a proof of concept. Maybe they're testing the waters with this almost sort of, I won't want to say half-assed, because what's there is well made. The models are really well done. There's some really good damage modeling that's done in the cars throughout the races. You can also make that impact performance if you wish. Everything looks really nice. The handlings is confusing because certainly the open wheel cars do not handle like an open wheel car should in an impact situation. Because obviously they've kind of had to shoehorn in the sort of physics modeling for the closed wheel cars onto the open wheel, and it all kind of feels a bit strange. But then the closed cars, they stick to the tracks in ways that make me think more Need for Speed than, say, a sim racer. So it's all very confused, but not poorly made. I mean, the graphics look great, it runs really well. I found there's some strange additions, right? You have like a pit crew guy talking to you like you would in the F1 race, but he never has anything important to say. Like, he just basically goes, oh yeah, and you can basically you can tell your teammate in a race to push or defend you, but I never felt like it was needed. It feels like these ideas, and then you've got this sort of broadcast commentary, which you wouldn't hear if you were driving in a race, like if you were in F1, but that sometimes spouts up and says something like random or weird, and I ended up turning that almost completely off so it didn't like annoy me, because it just doesn't make sense in the context of the game. So it's got all these different identities that are trying to sort of exert themselves in these really peculiar ways, and nothing really meshes. There's no connective tissue. There's no story reason for anything. There's no, other than you wanting to be the best, in this fictitious racing series, there really is no reason for you to be doing anything in this game. You've got progression models, you've got leveling up, you unlock different liveries, you can buy loads of different cars. There's lots of that going on. There's not a lot of customization other than visual aspects. There's a lot of official real-world sponsors in this. There's a lot of, obviously real cars that are modeled well. Codemasters do that very, very well. It's just, why am I playing this game? It's like, what's the reason to go racing? That's very apparent in a rally game. That's very apparent in an F1 game. But in this, there's just nothing really going on in that area. And it's a shame.
More than that, I guess, what's the reason to play this above any of the other dozens of racing games on whichever platform you happen to most use? Because we're not short of racing games, so if it really is that sort of generic and safe, then yeah, it's a tough call, isn't it, to pick this one out amongst the crowd. You mentioned it was mainly city based. Are there at least unique locations to visit that you might not see elsewhere? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there are these fictitious cities based, which have like national tells to them. So there's like ones in China, which kind of they make it feel a bit Chinese with certain types of what you'd expect from tight roads and stuff. There's a few official real tracks, but the selection is really low. I believe there's only about 10 different tracks or something like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but they change it up with different times of day, with different weather effects, and they do model the sort of like the rain effects, on the grip and that really well. And they also reverse the tracks, but there's actually not many in there at all. So even early on, when I was just dabbling with all the different series and jumping in and out, there was loads of repetition as to the tracks I was going on. So I was getting to know these very short tracks. I mean, most races are only like 2 or 3 laps long, maybe 4 or 5, but they're over very quick. You kind of jump in, you jump out, you're going from one race to another, and it all becomes very nondescript and very forgettable, and you never really get a sense of place. This is particularly strange when you think about Codemasters rally games and Codemasters Formula 1 games, which are all about getting to know locations, getting to know tracks, really committing to those environments so that you can get better at them and perform better and practice and try again and again and again. Whereas this, everything just feels minimal. This feels like it should have been at the beginning of a console generation as a proof of concept, and that they could build upon it, and maybe that's still what's going to happen, but the timing feels very strange. I would like to disagree with you a little bit though. You mentioned there not being a lot of racing games. Oh, there are a lot of racing games. I don't think there are, to be honest, because if you think about it, you've got the Gran Turismo's exclusive to PlayStation, you've got Forza stuff exclusive to Xbox. What other racing games of note are there at the minute?
There's Cars, which we've had not so long ago, Cars 2.
That's going back a few years now, mate. I mean, and same thing with Need for Speed. Need for Speed's kind of been off the grid for a while.
There's a new Need for Speed out in the next couple of months, though.
Yeah, that's true. But they've got ahead of that, though. But I mean, yeah, racing games of a certain type, of an arcadey accessible nature, are on the downturn. And I think that's what they've seen. And they've gonna make this game for it. But there's just not enough flavour here. There's not enough of anything that makes it unique, that sets it apart, which is such a shame. I really wanted to like this game, because when they announced Grid was coming back, I was really excited. I was like, oh, wicked. This is going to be cool, somewhere sat between the F1 sim games and like a Burnout game, somewhere in the middle there, arcade accessible. I'm up for that from a different, third-party manufacturer that's going to be out on all the platforms. Let's have a go at that. But they're just not... It's not a bad game, not at all. It's just a completely unremarkable one. And that's Grid, guys. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up, Richard?
No, that's a bit of a shame, isn't it? Well, hopefully it will find its audience. I mean, they're always competent, aren't they? If not particularly exciting, I suppose, is the takeaway from that. But yeah, I'm sure someone will find something in it.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of another episode of Experience Kills. I've been your host, Ben. You can find me at DIYE on Twitter. You can find Richard at Colonel Red on Twitter. And you can find us in general at Experience Kills. If you've listened to the audio version of this, please head over to the YouTube channel and give us a like and subscribe. That's all we ask. And if you're already on YouTube, give us a comment. Maybe send us a tweet. We'd love to hear from you. So until next time, I'm going to say, let's drive off into the sunset together, Richard.
Brum brum.
Bye!
Bye.